we were scammed, folks. There's really no other way to put it. Last night, we were scammed. Caitlin Clark played for 2 minutes, subbed for 7 minutes, played for 3 minutes, subbed for 6 minutes, halftime. Played for 2 minutes, subbed for 5 minutes, played for 3 minutes, subbed for 6 minutes, game over. Last night...
16 minutes. That's the whole night Caitlin Clark got against the Sparks. And the Fever coaching staff still hasn't explained why it came in 4-minute pieces.
Now we're going to get into Caitlin Clark's comments on the load managing a little bit later in the day. But the fan reaction from last night's game...
Wednesday night in Los Angeles, Indiana, lost 106-92, and the box score is almost beside the point. What actually broke the internet was the substitution pattern underneath it. 2 minutes in, 7 minutes out, 3 minutes in, 6 minutes out, on a loop, for a player 2 weeks removed from a back injury. Stick around, because later in this video, Clark addresses that rotation directly, in her own words, and it does not sound like a player who agrees with the plan.
Brutal. Fans are pissed and they have every right to be pissed. Fans feel played and they have every right to feel played. Fans feel like they wasted their time and they have every right to feel like they wasted their time.
Fans didn't need a press conference to know what they'd watched. Clark finished with 9 points on 4 of 12 shooting, 1 of 6 from 3, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, 4 turnovers, and a -16 in that span. That's not a bad shooting night from a rusty player easing back in. That's a player who never got to stay on the court long enough to find one make and build off it. Kelsey Mitchell called the defense out afterward too, which tells you this wasn't just a Clark problem. It was a full team performance that happened to have its most talked about symptom wearing number 22.
People set aside important things around their day and schedule their day around Caitlin Clark playing. You have fans staying up till 10, watching the game till 1. You have fans staying up until 9, watching the game till 12. You have the West Coast crowd, 7 o'clock. You have people overseas, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., in Australia, whatever, 5 a.m., 6 a.m., 7 a.m. People all over the world staying up and watching this team play. And the disrespect that we get...
People rearrange actual evenings around this. A West Coast tip-off means an 11 p.m. finish on the East Coast, later for fans overseas watching at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, depending on the time zone. That's the audience this league has built around Clark specifically, an audience that didn't exist for the WNBA at this scale 3 years ago. And on Wednesday night, that audience got a player in street clothes for 2 out of every 5 minutes of the game they stayed up for.
Today, feeling how they're feeling last night, don't blame me one bit. Because every time Caitlin Clark plays for 2 minutes and then gets sit for 5, Stephanie White and the Indiana Fever are doing a big spitting a big loogie in our face. Every time Caitlin Clark gets thrown in the corner to set screens and do this off-ball, Stephanie White and the...
It's not just the minutes, either. Watch the possessions Clark was actually on the floor for, and she kept getting used the same way. Spaced into a corner, set a screen, relocate, rarely the first read. For a player who runs an offense as well as anyone in the league, when she's given the ball in space, that's a strange way to spend her limited run. If you're only going to give her 16 minutes, you'd think the priority would be making sure every one of those minutes actually ran through her. What should bother you more than the final score is that nobody in that arena needed an analytics department to explain why this substitution pattern was a bad idea for an athlete rebuilding rhythm after a back injury. Basic basketball logic says you either extend her minutes gradually or you shut her down entirely and let Kelsey Mitchell run the offense, which this roster has already shown it can do without her. Instead, Indiana picked a third option that satisfies nobody. Not enough rest to actually protect her, not enough run to let her find anything. And this wasn't a first-year coach making a rookie mistake. Stephanie White has been doing this job long enough to know what a stop-start rotation does to a player's timing. So either there's a medical reason nobody's fully explaining, or this was simply the wrong call, live, in front of a national audience, with a franchise cornerstone's body on the line.
This is WNBA basketball. Right here. What we're about to watch right here. These people are getting paid. You have a $1 million player, you have an $850,000 player, and you have an $800,000 player. Failing to convert a 3-on-2.
Consider what's actually riding on this roster right now, because 2026 isn't just another WNBA season. It's the first year of a brand new collective bargaining agreement that rewired the economics of this entire league. The salary cap jumped to $7 million. Supermax players can now sign for $1.4 million a year, up from roughly $250,000 under the old deal. Kelsey Mitchell signed hers this offseason. 1 year, $1.4 million, the richest contract in franchise history. Clark's own salary jumped too, from just under $78,000 in 2025 to somewhere around $530,000 this year under the new rookie scale, with a path to a max contract as soon as 2027 if she keeps performing at an all-WNBA level. That's the financial reality these substitution patterns are unfolding inside. Indiana isn't a small market team scraping by anymore. It's operating in the most heavily invested era women's basketball has ever seen, with 2 players on this specific roster carrying contracts that reflect exactly how much the league is betting on this backcourt. When that kind of commitment spends stretches parked on a bench, watching from a few feet away while the offense stalls, that's not a minor procedural choice. Get it right, and Indiana looks like a smart, protective organization playing the long game. Get it wrong repeatedly in front of that many cameras, and it starts looking like an organization that doesn't fully trust its own plan.
Let's take a look, shall we? Kelsey Mitchell driving. No contest whatsoever. No contest whatsoever. The distance between Kelsey Mitchell and Ari Atkins is the same distance between me and New York City. 40 miles. You know what we call that? Shout out to the Pope. That's called a...
Somewhere in the middle of all that, Los Angeles just kept getting to the rim like a toll booth was missing. Kelsey Mitchell drove past defenders more than once, and on the other end, Indiana's help defense showed up half a step too late over and over. The Sparks shot 45% from 3 on the night, 9 of 20, and every single Sparks starter finished in double figures. Ray Burrell alone put up 22. This wasn't a bad third quarter. It was 40 minutes of a defense that couldn't find its footing, regardless of who was on the floor for Indiana, Clark included.
Stoink. 3-on-2 opportunity, 3 point-blank shots, 0 contests. Fever come out empty-handed. You can't make this. Oh, did I mention the Fever lost? 106-92.
Final score, 106-92. And the shooting splits tell the real story. Los Angeles hit nearly half its threes and got whatever it wanted, whenever it wanted it. Indiana's offense wasn't the problem, not with Mitchell going 5 of 9 from deep on her way to 29 points, extending a run where she's now led the team in scoring 4 straight games, 25 or better in every one of them, and Lexi Hull adding 14, the only other Fever starter to crack double digits. The problem was that every time Indiana scored, the Sparks answered right back, possession for possession, because the defense had no answer for a team that came in banged up and still dropped 106. That loss dropped Indiana to 12-9 on the season in the middle of a 4-game road trip that was supposed to build momentum, not raise more questions about whether this staff has this roster figured out.
Get the Fever healthy, priority 1. Caitlin minutes restriction, whatever. The absolute mind-blowingly terrible Yahtzee-like rotations are a goddamn embarrassment to the game of basketball. We're giving Dantes 20-plus minutes just to prove she was worth keeping over Prasad. What the F are we doing here? Yeah, we saw Dantes last night. We saw Van Tooten, Van Slooten, Van Hooten, Van How...
Break down the actual rotation, and it gets harder to defend. Clark checked in for 2 minutes, came out for 7, checked in for 3, came out for 6, played through to halftime, came back for 2 more, sat for 5, played 3, sat for 6 again. That's not a modified minutes restriction. That's closer to a stress test, and it's the kind of pattern that makes it almost impossible for any player, healthy or not, to string together enough possessions to sync up with 4 teammates on the floor. This isn't the first time this exact approach has bitten Indiana this season, either. Earlier this year, a similar stop-start substitution pattern from Stephanie White lined up with a blowout loss to the expansion Portland Fire that made headlines of its own. This wasn't an isolated, in-the-moment decision born out of Wednesday's specific circumstances. It's a rotation philosophy White has leaned on more than once, with mixed results both times. To be fair to the bench, it wasn't all bad. Damaris Dantas, the veteran forward Indiana brought in behind Aaliyah Boston this offseason, gave the Fever 12 solid points off that same bench, and Tiasha Harris added 10 more running the point in Clark's minutes off the floor. If the goal was finding secondary scoring on a night Indiana was already down its starting center to a leg injury, that part of the plan actually worked. The real problem was never whether the bench could contribute. It was whether the franchise's most important player could ever settle into the game long enough to matter.
This team makes me sad. I don't even get mad anymore, just really sad. Shout out to the vet. It's hard for me to get mad and sad when I have such a great, when we have such a great time in the venue. It's hard for me to get mad and sad watching these games. We have a great time, cracking jokes, shooting the shit. This was like watching the Kelsey Mitchell show. It's all about her never passing the ball and throwing up garbage until she stacks her point total. Such a disappointment. This is what you get when you're focused on culture instead of championships.
There's a broader argument underneath all of this about what this front office is actually building toward. Indiana has leaned publicly on the word culture this season. Chemistry, buy-in, the long view. And there's a real version of that argument that holds up. You don't build a champion around one player. You build a roster deep enough to survive nights like this one. But culture and execution aren't supposed to be in tension. A team can absolutely prioritize depth and buy-in while still making sure its most efficient offensive weapon isn't spending the fourth quarter of a winnable road game watching from a folding chair. Those two goals only conflict when the rotation plan itself is the problem. And increasingly, that's what this looks like.
Oh, you can't make it up. You can't make this up. Yeah, I turned it off after the first quarter because I knew exactly what was going to happen. Wild work. This is the worst managed franchise of all time. If an injured player can't give you over 5 minutes of consecutive play, do not play them. They literally played like they never played with each other before.
What actually happened when reporters asked Clark about all of this afterward is a lot more pointed than building back slowly. Clark told Indy Star's Chloe Peterson that the decision to play her in that kind of short rotation wasn't her call to make. She didn't stop there. She described playing 3 minutes, coming out, playing 3 more, then sitting again, and said it made it genuinely difficult to ever settle into a rhythm, though she was careful to add that plenty of her looks were good ones, some just didn't fall, and that physically her body felt fine afterward. That's about as close as you get, in real time, to a franchise player publicly distancing herself from her own coaching staff's game plan without blowing the whole thing up in front of cameras. She's not saying she's hurt. She's not saying she's frustrated with her body. She's saying directly that somebody else made this call, and that the call made the game harder than it needed to be. Stephanie White's response, for what it's worth, wasn't defensive so much as procedural. She told reporters that any player who's missed a couple of weeks needs time to get reacclimated, that building endurance back up takes time regardless of who you are, and that Clark hadn't been able to practice much either heading into Wednesday. Reasonable on its face. It just doesn't answer the question everybody watching actually had. Why building that endurance back up had to look like 3-minute increments in a nationally streamed game instead of a slower burn in practice reps first.
Not a single competent person running your organization. I'm old enough to remember when Kaylin and Kelsey were the best backcourt in the W. She scores 29 on 33 minutes and loses by herself. Sounds like 2018, 2022. From today, I'm out of Stephanie White.
To understand why Clark was even in this position, go back 2 weeks to June 24th, when Phoenix and Indiana played what's become one of the most talked about games of the WNBA season, for reasons that have nothing to do with the final score. In the second quarter, as players scrambled for a loose ball, Mercury forward Alyssa Thomas drove her fist into Clark's throat area. No foul was called live. Clark stayed in, finished the half, then left the game entirely in the second half with a back injury, on a night when Indiana's own coach called the officiating egregious and said her superstar had absorbed at least 2 uncalled hits that any consistent standard would have flagged. The league agreed, eventually. The next day, the WNBA upgraded the play to a flagrant foul 2 and suspended Thomas 1 game, the first suspension of her 13-year career, along with a $1,000 fine. Fever president Kelly Krauskopf said afterward that player safety needs to be the top priority in this league, and that the team's focus was on Clark and getting ready for the next game. It wasn't even the first time officials have had to go back and upgrade a foul against Clark after the fact. Her rookie season, a shoulder check from Chennedy Carter, got the same retroactive treatment, and last year an injury-plagued sophomore campaign limited Clark to just 13 games total. 2 seasons in, and the pattern fans keep flagging is the same one: a star who keeps absorbing physical punishment the league only acknowledges after it's already cost her time on the floor. So when you hear that Clark is on a minutes restriction 2 weeks later, this is the injury that restriction is protecting. A back that flared up after a collision the league itself admitted should have been flagged live, which makes the actual execution of that protection, 3-minute increments with no real continuity, feel less like careful load management and more like a team that still hasn't figured out how to build a plan around it.
Folks, you got 178 comments to 351 likes. The post of them losing, bad work. 394 comments to 380 likes.
Fans have noticed the pattern extends past just this one game too. Look at how the team's own social posts have been landing lately. A post highlighting individual stats from Wednesday's loss pulled a few hundred comments and barely cracked 400 likes. Numbers that would have been an afterthought during Indiana's biggest moments the past 2 seasons. Engagement is starting to concentrate almost entirely around Clark herself and go quiet for nearly everything else involving this roster. That's a genuinely risky trend for a franchise sitting on the most valuable media rights asset this league has ever had. The entire economic case for the new CBA, for the $7 million cap, for the Supermax deals, gets built on sustained attention, not just spikes whenever Clark happens to play well. If the fan base starts treating everything that isn't a Clark highlight as background noise, that's not just a fan problem, that's a product problem. And it's showing up in real time, one lukewarm engagement number at a time. And to be fair, there's a wrinkle in this story that complicates the easy version of it. Indiana has actually gone 3-0 in games Clark has missed entirely this season. That's not the record of a team that's helpless without her, and it's worth saying plainly, because it undercuts any claim that the front office is quietly trying to bury her. The real frustration isn't that Clark doesn't matter to winning. It's that on the nights she is actually healthy enough to play, the plan for how to use her still doesn't look finished.
I don't know if you guys noticed this, but the Indiana Fever, they're not getting the engagement that they used to on Twitter. They're just not. They're not getting the engagement that they used to on Twitter. If it's not Caitlin Clark related, the rest of the team, nobody bats an eye. Nobody even wants to type, "You get them, girls." Maybe like 7 people.
So where does this actually go from here? Clark was already ruled out for Thursday's regular season finale against Phoenix, streaming nationally, the third and final meeting between these two teams this year, with the season series tied at 1 game apiece and closing the book on the same matchup where this entire injury saga started. Aaliyah Boston was expected back in that game after sitting out Wednesday's loss with a leg issue of her own, which at least gives Indiana its other all-star piece to lean on. And Kelsey Mitchell remains the engine either way, given what she's done the last 4 games. The real target for Clark's return to a normal rotation is Sunday in Las Vegas against the Aces, the final stop on this 4-game road trip before Indiana comes home on July 15th to host the expansion Golden State Valkyries. Here's the question nobody in that organization has fully answered yet. Is this a genuinely conservative, medically driven plan to protect a franchise player recovering from a back injury caused by a foul the league itself admitted should have been called? Or is it a coaching staff framing an in-game rotation problem as caution when the player at the center of it is on record saying it wasn't even her call and that it made the game harder to play? Both things can be partly true at once. What can't be true is that 3 minutes on, 6 minutes off, on a loop in front of a national audience is actually the best way to get a generational talent healthy and rhythmic at the same time. What do you think is really going on here? A legitimate injury plan, or a rotation this coaching staff hasn't fully thought through? Drop your take in the comments, like the video if you want more breakdowns like this one, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens Sunday in Las Vegas.